Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you staying on mute just to help us to cut back on any background noise. If you're new to Zoom, you do have the ability to turn on your video or turn off your video at the bottom left-hand corner. You can also mute or unmute yourself from there. There's also the ability to raise your hand, though today we're going to ask you put your questions in the chat just because currently we have about 65 of you and we expect a few more. And that'll make it a little bit easier for us to manage if we use the chat as our question and answer bank. Thankfully, our wonderful Mark Orcutt and Laura Case are both here to help us to monitor that. And we imagine you'll have lots of questions as we go, so please feel free to put those in there, both as our speakers talk and as we get to the question and answer section. Kristen Connolly, our fearless leader, is here to moderate the discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to her shortly. But first, I wanted to say hello and welcome to the Economic Development Task Force of the East Bay Leadership Council. We have two wonderful co-chairs who lead this task force, Amalia and Elaine, and they're both here with us. So I just want to kind of look over at them and ask, is there anything you'd both like to say, or do you feel comfortable with us getting started? All right, I'm getting 2 thumbs up. Thank you, Amalia and Elaine. And they were really supportive of this really innovative idea to start talking about what our offices might look like and what the future might hold as we start to think about recovery. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to turn it over to Kristen.
Great, thank you so much, Lindy. You are our Zoom wizard and have led the effort to get us to this place where we can still convene at a time when we can't physically be together, and I'm so grateful. So this is a barn burner of a turnout for an Economic Development Task Force meeting, 67 and strong and growing. So I'm just really excited. Our two presenters this morning are both members of the East Bay Leadership Council Board. In fact, perhaps our longest serving member, Ed Del Beccaro, and one of our newest members, Brian Turner. The format this morning is that Brian and Ed have each prepared a 10-minute presentation that we're going to be sharing with you. And then after, so Brian's going to go first, and then Ed will go, and then I'll be moderating a Q&A. As Lindy mentioned, we're going to be taking your questions through the chat function, just in order to manage the large number of people on the screen. I did want to give you a tip. I would suggest that you actually, in the top right corner of Zoom, select speaker view, and that will actually make the speaker very large on your screen, and a lot of the other folks will get smaller. So that's something that I've used as I've managed my Zoom life, both for work and volunteering and as a school board member. So I recommend that speaker view. But I think that's about it before we get started. Of course, many of you on this have my cell phone, so if you feel like I'm doing an inadequate job, you can text me in addition to chatting to me. But I'm really excited about the work that we're going to be able to do together this morning. So first up, I want to introduce Brian Turner, who's the CEO of Buildings IoT, which is really 3 tech companies in one. I'll let Brian talk to you a little bit about his company. But they're headquartered in Concord and work all over the country and globally. I know they have clients in Mexico and Canada and other places. So I just really appreciated that, Brian's been really forward thinking, because as I look to the 6 criteria that Governor Newsom has identified for what it's going to take to reopen our economy, preparing the workplace so that everyone is safe where they're providing childcare, where kids are going to school, where businesses are operating, is really something that I want to lean into as an organization. I'm not a public health officer. That's not my lane, but I want to make sure that we're harnessing the great resources of our members to help solve this problem and help us move forward during these extraordinary times. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian Turner. Welcome, Brian.
All right, thank you. It's good to see everybody virtually. I know it might be hard to believe, but it is hard to shut me up. I know I'm pretty quiet in the meetings, and most of you probably haven't even known that I'm there. But when we do get on topics like this that we're pretty passionate about, I can go long. So, Lindy, do you have the slides ready to roll?
Yes, I do. I'll put them up on the screen now.
All right, great. So Buildings IoT, as Kristen said, is really 4 different entities. Buildings IoT is largely a management firm and basically we own all the other entities. But we also have a software development company up in Ottawa, Canada, where we develop cloud-based SaaS software that allows people to monitor and control and operate their buildings, and not just the heating and air conditioning, but a lot of the different intelligent aspects of a building, from IT all the way to the different systems that are controlling the environment. And then we have ControlCo, which is our longest standing company, which is a distribution company that sells products into this space. And then we have an integration company that actually goes and deploys technologies like this. And we have an IT group that actually does managed services for IT. So we have a lot of stuff around technology for buildings. And so a lot of this stuff is stuff we've been talking about for a long time. And it's interesting what's going on. So let's go ahead and start through these first couple of slides. They're pretty easy to talk through. So this is what we left, 8 weeks ago, or feels like 8 weeks. I guess it's only been 6, but this is what we left, right? So very collaborative work environment. There was a lot of pressure and expectation that there was in-person collaboration, lots of meetings, lots of personal, I would say what we're talking about now, invading personal space is a thing of the past. That was accepted, and not just accepted, but expected, especially with the new work cultures and all the different designs that were going into commercial real estate and the layouts and furniture and all that stuff. And what we're about to go back to is this, right? So, we got to tape ourselves off, and we've got to wear masks in the office, and even those people on the top right might be too close, even with their masks on, right? So, and they might be getting socially shamed by a coworker across the way for being too close. This kind of stuff is actually happening. I'm sure. Just if you guys are getting out and walking, you'll notice if you walk by somebody, now you're offended if they don't cross the street to get to the other side, right? And you might not even look at them. It's crazy how this pandemic has really affected the personal and the human psyche. And so that's going to go back into the workplace, especially as we return. And I want to say today, most everything I'm going to talk about today is obvious. It's going to seem obvious. You're going to think every building already does this. You're going to think the technology's been around to do this already for years, and you'll be right. You'll be absolutely right that nothing I'm going to talk about today is new. And that's also something that I think is important for this audience, is to understand you don't have to buy something brand new, some COVID of the day solution. There really isn't a COVID of the day solution. There's no quick fix here. I can't just sign up for $100 a month for a SaaS product and I'm now safe, right? It's more fundamental than that, and it's one of the reasons why I think it will be hard. Organizations like us who are we are in this business, and it's difficult for us to do these things unless we 100% owned our own building and invested all of the money ourselves in these technologies. And so as we have dealt with our landlords, this is a constant fight at the negotiation table. We get the landlords to a lot of times agree to do things, and then once they get assigned, they rarely do them, right? It's just the ROI model has been tough when we're talking about this kind of technology. Okay, next. So one of the things I want to talk about here is when we look at the Harvard School for Public Health, they put out a study a couple of years ago, and this is a couple of years ago. This isn't as a result of the response to the pandemic. This is just trying to make a healthy environment in buildings and the types of things you would need to do in order to make a healthy building. So there's personnel measures, there's air quality measures, and then there's surface disinfection measures. And we're going to talk specifically about the first two. The study is great. It's publicly available. Anybody's welcome to go download it and just kind of get an idea. But the pictures on the right are very real, right? So, can a plant actually survive and live inside your space? If it can't, it might tell you something about the air quality in your building. But number two is that bottom picture there of all the air handling equipment and all the ductwork that gets on a roof that most of you probably don't ever see or pay attention to on a facility. You expect the air quality is there, you expect the temperature controls there, you expect those things to be there. You don't really look into all of the parts and pieces and technology that has to be put in order to deliver that. So we'll go ahead and bounce to the next one. So we'll start with personnel measures. So OSHA is already ahead of us on this. They've got guidance for preparing workplaces for COVID. This is just a small sample, and this talks specifically about what you can do, that you have to take active measures to keep people 6 feet from each other while they're working, and that you have to have engineering, administrative controls, and PPE, right? So you have to offer them all of those things before you're allowed to bring them back to work. Now, these are guidelines, and OSHA is very specific and very clear to say these are not mandates, but it will not surprise me if they become mandates before we're actually allowed to go back to work, especially in states like California, where we're being a little more conservative in our reentry plans. And then establishing alternating days, extra shifts, et cetera. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So one of the things we're looking at is what kind of technology. So you can have policies, right? But policies are only as good as the humans who follow them. And what we've known about human nature, humans get lazy. If the policies are in place, let's say for 18 months or 24 months, which is, some of the timeframes I've heard that we're going to have some sort of social distancing practice in place, then we're going to have to actually monitor it, because in order to have policies that aren't monitored, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so there are simple things that you can buy today. I wouldn't say they're off the shelf. You're not going to go down to Home Depot and get them, but they are technologies that are readily available. We're working with a commercial office customer in Toronto who is deploying occupancy detection in their elevator lobbies, but also their elevator cabs. So they're saying, hey, no more than 4 people allowed on an elevator at any time when we come back, and that each of the 4 people has to stand in the corner. So it sounds funny, but that's what they want. And so they're going to have actual people counting inside each cab. And so if 5 people enter the cab, the doors won't close. But something else, if the elevator is moving and there's more people on the floor waiting to be picked up and there's 10 people there, then the elevator system will get that information from the occupancy system and instruct other elevators to go there. Because as you might imagine, we've been so focused on energy savings and making buildings more energy efficient that sometimes we make decisions to actually increase capacity inside of an elevator. So in order to use less elevator energy, we actually have smart elevator algorithms that are saying, hey, that elevator, it was on its way to floor 6. We'll just have it go to floor 8 to pick up the 6 people there, then come to floor 6 to pick up the 4 people there. And we'll only use that one elevator and be very efficient versus having 2 elevators moving, right, and using that energy. So that strategy is going to have to change, right? At least for this interim, reentry program. And again, we don't know how long that reentry is going to be lasting. Individual offices, open floor plans. So we've got an open floor plan I'll show later that's designed for, I think, 20 people. When you really look at trying to give everybody 6 feet of workspace, I might be able to get 10 in there, maybe 11 if I'm lucky. So that means we're going to have to start building some teams, and maybe we use our access control to actually enforce it. So, hey, your card just doesn't work and let you in the building at all between the hours of 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then at noon, you're now allowed to work from noon to 4 inside the building. And you got your early friends and late friends. So we go back to our kindergarten days. And so we're really trying to think about all of that for our own company as well as the clients that we're advising. And then you're going to have a lot more secure VPN connections. You've got to give your employees the technology, because we're going to be telling them, hey, if you feel sick at all, you can't figure out if it's an allergy or a flu, you can't come in, you need to work from home, right? You might feel well enough to work, but you're not allowed to come in. So we need to make sure we have all of our employees ready to set up to work from anywhere all the time in a secure fashion so that their work is not inhibited. I know we're running short on time. We've got a few more slides to run through. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but effectively, this is ASHRAE's standards. So you may have heard the CDC report that insinuated that the first infection was caused by ventilation and moving the disease from one table to the next in a restaurant. To me, that's not a responsible message, because one, we don't know how close those people were in the restaurant. There was no social distancing going on, and there's a lot of studies that show that while increasing your filtration and your ultraviolet and all of that stuff does greatly reduce the transmission, it's not a one shot kills all. You can't just say, hey, we've added filters and now no viruses will spread. But you can add filters and that does improve it. You can have 100% outdoor conditions, outdoor air and no recycled air, etc. There are problems with that, and I'm happy to answer some of those questions later. For example, I would say 95% of our air handling equipment in all buildings in the United States are not designed for 100% outside air, and they can't condition that space. And so if I have a hot day, which we're heading into, I'm not going to be able to bring in 100% fresh air and be able to provide the temperature control that I need, right? I just won't be able to do it. So we've got to be a little smarter than just say, open your outside air dampers. Let's go ahead and move to the next one. So one of the things we can do is, and all these images here are funny, but this is reality of what we deal with in offices every day, right? How many times you get, I'm hot, I'm cold, I don't feel comfortable, I'm getting a headache, I come back after lunch, I'm sluggish, right? All of these things are very real things that we've been dealing with forever in the workplace, and there's ways to resolve it, but the ways are expensive. And so one of the things that I'll leave you with, and obviously we can measure CO2, we can measure VOCs, and we can know how well these things are working. We can tell you how many air changes you're getting. We can tell you those things. But if you're a tenant, how do you do these things? Is this really the responsibility of the owner of the building? Not really, right? It's kind of a shared responsibility. You have a responsibility to your employees if you're a tenant, and then the building owner has a responsibility to their tenants. And so it's a shared, to me, it's a completely shared investment in creating that healthy workforce or workspace. Let's go ahead to the next one, Lindy. So this is just a quick floor plan of our office. It's called 8,000 square feet of leasable space, but really it's about 6,200 square feet with the wonderful multiplier that building owners get to apply. So all the green dots are where we're going to be putting occupancy detectors, and so these are going to tell us not only that there's presence, and emotion, or in this case, we're actually using pulse radar, so it's actually measuring the fact that they're breathing and that they have a pulse. So we know it's actually a person and not just something that's warm. The other thing is we have cameras and we have access control, and we'll have gas detection. So every one of these zones will end up with gas detection pretty much around this big red dot here and these Wi-Fi sections. So everywhere we have a Wi-Fi zone, we'll have a gas detection zone, and then all the green dots are occupancy. We'll be able to know exactly how many people are in there, when they're in there, how far apart they are from each other, etc. That's what we can do as a tenant. And then I can use that information to then communicate with my building owner to let them know what the conditions are like in our space, to let them know if we believe that we're not getting enough adequate ventilation, to let them know if we think that there's VOCs that are traveling through their outside air ducts. Because if you open your outside air next to an exhaust and the exhaust is putting stuff out from your kitchen, and then you're bringing that right back into your fresh air intake, it can really cause problems. So you have to be able to at least monitor this stuff. Talking to Ed earlier or late last week, he acknowledged what we commonly believe is that most building owners of buildings that we're in, which we're in 1200 Concord, which is a 6-story building, they're not that smart. They don't invest that kind of money because the ROI has been tough to get on a dollar per square foot basis. So what I'm really interested in, in your feedback, whether you want to send to me individually or not, is what happens with this? Do we actually see a paradigm shift from the corporate real estate, commercial real estate, from Class A to Class B, all the way to strip centers, shopping centers. Do we shift the paradigm from human capital or from financial capital as the most important thing on ROI, or does the human capital side of it start to fit into the equation? And I'm not talking about right now. I think human capital is very high on everybody's radar right now. I'm really curious if it's going to actually stick, 6 months after we've re-entered, right? Because what we found in the past is everybody talks a good game about this stuff. We want to care about our employees, but at the end of the day, when we start doing the ROI model, we always take it back to financial and the stuff we can measure. And human productivity is difficult to measure at scale, and it's difficult to put into a spreadsheet. So that's one of my things that I'm grappling with and trying to figure out if this thing will really last. But there are technologies today that we can absolutely deploy and get your facilities ready for monitoring your systems. So that's what I got for now. Thanks for the time. Sorry I went over, Lindy. Told you I would not. I'm hard to shut up. So.
Oh, no. I mean, you're right in the wheelhouse, Brian, of what people, what the 70+ people on the call have logged in to learn about. But we're going to leave that there. There are some questions that we'll get to that have been put in the chat for you, Brian, but we'll wait until after Ed's presentation. So with Brian wondering about, will there be a commercial real estate paradigm shift? We have our own Ed Del Beccaro, who is the longest serving member of the East Bay Leadership Council Board and is leading the charge for the East Bay for Tri-Commercial. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ed, and I'm grateful for what you're going to be sharing with us this morning. And I will set a timer and we'll try to stay a little bit closer on that, and so we have some time for questions. Take it away, Ed.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Brian. Very informative. Yes, I think that's going to permanently change commercial real estate. It will be a question of money, and we can go into that later. By the way, just two COVID updates. Everybody knows shelter in place for the Inner Bay has been extended through May. There's going to be some exceptions for outdoor activities. So, Kristen, if you could research that for us. If anybody needs to find a mask, one tip is go to your dry cleaners who are essential. Dry cleaners made me and my wife 2 custom masks that have the 2 cloth filters. So what I'm going to talk about is commercial real estate before and after. Before is, let's say, March 1 and before, first 2 months. The commercial real estate market, which is a reflection of the economy. Remember, buildings follow the economy. It's the economic drivers that create jobs, that create activity, not the building or the other way around. So in the case of February, if we go back to 10 million years ago, it seems, to February, we were still in the 11th year of expansion. February was actually one of the better job creation months, over 230,000 jobs, and commercial real estate reflected that. So there were records in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, elsewhere as to what was happening in commercial real estate. Housing prices were still through the roof, and there was only a few exceptions, meaning retail was in a previous trend of brick and mortar decreasing, restaurants, and some other related product. So, so the before was just that. Everybody in February 5th, February 10th thought more of the same. By the way, a caveat for any forecasters such as myself or other people, no one really knows. This is a very different event. And it's hard to predict September, October, let alone May in this case. So again, going to do the before, commercial real estate was doing well. Vacancy rates in most of the Bay Area cities were in single digits. The only exception, again, besides retail, was suburban office. Suburban office in some of the locations still at 12 or 15%. Let's say Shadelands and Walnut Creek, let's say parts of Concord, and other such suburban markets in Fairfield, and what we call the outer ring. But the downtown real estate was reflecting all the job creation. So then what happened? So then we had the storm, euphemism for COVID. So the storm hit, let's say, in real practical terms, in early March. Shelter in place occurred, and 30% unemployment, record job unemployment, and stay-at-home shelter rules. Everything slowed down. Everything it was a drastic before and after. How does that affect real estate? Next slide. So I was able to talk to Chris Thornburg quite extensively earlier in the week, last week. Most of you are familiar with him from Beacon Economics, formerly UCLA. So he just gave me some simple numbers, and I can do more detail offline. First of all, first quarter is really a tale of 3 months. The first 2 months, we were heading along at a 5% plus GMP, or 3 to 5%. March was the terrible month, half of March. So it's going to turn out that March will probably be a negative 1 to 2% on an annualized basis contraction. Second quarter, storm hits. Now March is already passed. Now we're in April, May, June. April is terrible. So people are predicting a 30% contraction in GNP this second quarter. That's only for the quarter. When you analyze it, divide it by 4, if we recover in third or fourth quarter, it will be an annualized 7.5% negative. Other countries will do worse. But again, to repeat one sentence, the United States prior to the COVID was in a pretty healthy economic situation. There were disconnects here and there. There were bumps here and there in terms of housing prices. Some areas had oversupply, but in general, the United States economy was in good shape. Third quarter, what happens? If third quarter can have several scenarios, I'm going to go into that in a second, and then go into that how it applies to commercial real estate, job hiring or not. Next slide. So what's different about this crisis is that the COVID-19 is a stop-pause crisis caused by health mandates. And let's assume that the health mandates were required. That's not the question. It is not an economic event insofar as a bursting asset bubble. So what happened in 2007, 2008, there were 2 major asset bubbles that burst. And actually the housing bubble, believe it or not, across the country started bursting in late 2006, and we didn't feel the effects for a year. That then had all kinds of ramifications for retail. And then the next bubble that burst in 2008 was Wall Street, and where they were doing exotic conduit loans and other third-party securitization, that all collapsed. So those were two bubbles that caused then the subsequent Great Recession. Again, the current one is, the other times we've had a recession. So for instance, if you might remember in '92, we had a double dip recession. At the same time we went into Iraq. And then hurricanes or earthquakes like 1906 or other parts of the country causes recessions. That's not happening here. This is a stop-pause crisis. Note, by the way, some of the counties in the greater Bay Area outside of the Inner Bay, Napa's already moderated its stay-at-home, and so has Yolo County, Sacramento, and areas like that. So assuming we partially own, I wrote this on Saturday, so assuming we open in June 1 and wholly by third quarter with some restrictions, what happens to the economy and commercial real estate? People will go back to work, but which industries? Previous trends, as I mentioned, are going to be accelerated. So there's going to be some black and white, but it's mostly going to be an acceleration of previous trends. What are those trends? So the new buzzwords everybody's hearing now, we're going to have a V shape, which means quick. We're going to have a U shape, which means not so quick, but still come back. Or we're going to have a down shape recovery, depression. L shape means more time than a V shape or U shape, but not as bad as a depression. Well, what if I answer you on the next slide with all of the above? Next slide. So a V shape, we recover quickly. So what people are thinking now, there's going to be opportunity taken here, is that tech, biotech, life sciences, all artificial intelligence industries such as what Brian is in, last mile logistics, contract manufacturing. Contract manufacturing is where and these have pre-existed prior to COVID, but now they've been accelerated here and elsewhere in the country. So it's where you have a independent manufacturing warehouse that can then switch gears between different products. So one startup company might only need the manufacturing line for 20 hours, another then can rent it for the 10 hours after. So these can go 24 hours. So think of Tesla or other companies that are switching to creating ventilators, or Detroit. So that's the equivalent of contract manufacturing. You're going to see more flexible contract manufacturing processes. Therefore, you will see that as a positive for real estate in that area. Warehouse. Last mile logistics are, if you look at Safeway, Walmart, Target, they're all looking for a lot of warehouse space right now. The only fly in that ointment down the road will be, for instance, JCPenney has over 6 million feet of warehouse across the country. If they go bankrupt, as is predicted, because they're not making their bond payments in the next 2 weeks, that could release that warehouse space. Infrastructure contractors. You're going to see a lot of talk about infrastructure investment, no matter who's in power, whether it's the federal government, state, or county. So you're going to see money being pushed into road, transit, and other infrastructure improvements. You can already see some of the highways are being accelerated by working during the day. Any company associated with building infrastructure, engineers, contractors, will be a beneficiary of this. Robotics, good or bad, we're going to automate more. Right now, you already have some restaurants delivering food by robots. You're going to see robots in more Amazon-type warehouses doing the internal. You're going to see more social media software. So anything to do with AI, we predict, will come back sharply starting in the summer, September. So that part will be a V-shape. Now there is a multiplier effect. Everybody that then is related to that will also prosper. U-shape, it's going to take time. Next category, so that's going to be single family housing. You're already seeing stories in Washington, Seattle, New York, and San Francisco, where the millennials and other people wish they had a home away from downtown. It's unfortunately in dense areas where the COVID is taking more, has more effect. So all of a sudden the suburbs might be more, how should we say, attractive. What is occurring, counterintuitive, in the third ring, as we call it. Cities grow, metros grow 60 miles. So the third ring is Santa Rosa to Fairfield to Elk Grove to Stockton, Modesto, going around to Gilroy. Single family home sales through virtual sales are occurring in those subdivisions today. So those are, in those counties, they're allowed to do some work. And so people are actually buying, and it's called the new house syndrome. I'd rather have a new house because it can be certified clean, or the super commuter says with low interest rates, almost 2 to 3 points, you can buy a house where before you were forced to rent. So that's a counterintuitive. Housing in the inner bay will be lagging, multifamily. Medical will be lagging. Medical, a lot of cities aren't zoned to put medical into certain parts of their city. And believe it or not, hospitals are getting hurt. So Medicare for a lot of hospitals, I represent Children's, for instance, in Oakland, Medicare only reimburses 60 to 70% of every dollar. So a lot of what hospitals are doing is not being fully reimbursed. Meanwhile, they're postponing elective surgeries, which pay for everything. So some of that's going to be coming back, but medical then will take time. And also we have a person issue here, employment issue. Where are the people who are now being exhausted, the first responders? Difficult. This is a downward trend. This is where acceleration of previous trends is occurring because of what we're going through. So restaurants, California Association of Restaurants estimates 30% of restaurants will disappear by August, existing restaurants. The remaining restaurants that survive will, because they can demonstrate COVID-type procedures, as Brian suggested. You're going to see social seating required of 6 to 9 feet. Some cities can help where they have unused parking lot area. Maybe we temporarily fence some of the parking lot spaces in front of the restaurants to allow outdoor seating so we can get the seating. Because when you do 6 to 9 feet apart, you take away half to 2/3 of the restaurant seats. So even though that will help, it will not be sufficient for restaurants to stay in. Restaurants will shrink. So you're going to see more 2,000 foot versus 4,000 foot traditional white tablecloth. The white tablecloth will be the dinosaur, unless it's a tourist attraction, which is an issue, will disappear. Department stores are yesterday. So you're already hearing about Neiman Marcus, you're already hearing about Sears, you're already hearing about JCPenney. They were doomed, as they said before, Forever 21. It's no longer forever. So therefore, you're going to see a lot of boxes. Cities will have to adjust that they're not going to be able to depend upon retail taxes for their budgets. So big box retail, we're going to see a lot of empty big boxes. How do we zone to allow medical? How do we zone to allow alternative uses to create activity to help the rest of the center? Transit operators. People, I imagine, will be reluctant to get on any transit system for months. So this could be a long time to recover. Back office function in suburban locations. This will directly affect real estate again. So right now, if you're the back office of an insurance company, bank, civil engineering, we're learning to work remotely and we're learning to automate away those jobs. So you're going to see the AI revolution take over more and more functions of the back office for accounting bills and equivalent ordering and purchasing. So any building that relies upon the suburban office buildings, therefore, which still have not fully recovered from 208, believe it or not. That's why you don't see a lot of new construction, whether it's in Concord, San Ramon, or Pleasanton. You'll see continuing softness in that market. L-shaped. This could take a year. So as I said, hospitals. We're already seeing aggregation. You're going to see the difference between mission and profit hospitals. Mission hospitals take anybody who comes in, they have a mission to help, versus for some nonprofits or other hospitals without naming them. You're going to see an aggregation, good or bad, but they'll take time. Again, how do they come up with COVID clean process? How do they redo some of their buildings, etc.? Hotels. Hotels are in trouble. We were actually in a record hotel expansion prior, as late as February. Hotels now have seen activity drop 80%. So again, cities are going to be tough getting any TOT, room taxes. So hotels, some of them are allowing homeless and they're getting paid by the state. Some of them are being COVID type second places to stay. But hotels could take a year or two, and all the ecosystem that depends upon hotels. So that's the workers, that's the cleaners, and that's the restaurants. Tourism. It's going to be a long time. Tourism now is going to be, hey, can I go 5 miles to the state park, not fly to LA or New York or Italy? Farming, you're reading all the stories, bad stories, sad stories. We're dumping milk, we're plowing under farms. We're afraid of COVID, which has broken out in the meat processing plants. Well, if you bury crops this spring and early summer, that means we're not going to have some of this stuff back until next year. So you're going to see some supply chains in the food area hurt. Breweries, believe it or not, once you put beer in a keg, it only has a certain couple month lifetime. There's a New York Times article on the weekend. The breweries across the country, big and small, and especially the craft, are going to have to dump their beer. The problem is you can't just dump it into the drain or the rivers, because it impacts the chemistry of the river. So they're creating a chemical to raise the PSI of it. But breweries could be hard hit, especially craft. And then again, state, county, municipal, who've been relying on certain tax receipts, are going to be hard to come back. They're doing furloughs now, layoffs. Combine that with still the pension problem, and they'll be hard to recover. The other industry not put up here that's going to be hard to recover is auto. So the various big automakers, our sales are down 80%. And so therefore, how do they manufacture? What do they do when they come back? The good news on manufacturing in the United States, what people have learned is not, for the future, is not to have all their eggs in one basket. So if I'm Apple, tech company, manufacturing in China, East Asia, if I'm a pharma company manufacturing the component parts for various drugs, 80 to 90% of that is East Asia. So almost in self-defense and survival, all these companies are going to bring back we estimate 30% of their offshore manufacturing back to North America. So the good news is North America trade agreement is back in, was signed, as you know, 4 or 5 months ago. So look for northern Mexico, Canada, which already have logistics supply trains to the United States, and for various states in the United States to prosper because some of the offshore comes back. So in general, I'll close with this sentence. There are going to be losers. It's going to be more acceleration of difficult. One comment on medical. If you heard the esoteric word OSHPD, which is what medical buildings do to upgrade their internal air ventilation system so viruses don't go through the air conditioning. So you have a surgery center as one of your tenants. You don't want what they're doing to go over to the next tenant. So buildings will have to upgrade medical. Medical has already started upgrading because of various other mandates. It'll be interesting, as Brian said, to see what the Class A buildings could do. Downtown and tech buildings, I think, can afford it because rent is less of a factor. Suburban buildings will have more of an issue because rents, as they said, are not there. Expect vacancies in that. Like in all recession, depressions, or equivalents, there's opportunity. So for instance, in my business, the big 5 Wall Street firms, without naming them, have all done layoffs, cut staff. TRI, which has 140 people, 35 staff, we made it a commitment not to lay off our staff. We did get a PPP loan, which means 75% of those funds do go to the payroll. And we're actually hiring. And we're even planning on opening up in San Jose because we want to take advantage of the companies that come back and have a complete Bay Area coverage. So with that, I'll close and answer any questions.
Okay, great. I knew there was no way either of you were going to stay to 10 minutes, and that's fine. That's fine. We do have lots and lots of questions. So thank you so much. And a few have been sent to the whole group, but I've been getting a lot of individual questions. And actually, Ed, near the end of your talk, you did discuss the situation where the Class A buildings, can make some of these tweaks and already have invested in their buildings to make them smart buildings, and Brian talked about this, but so much of the office space around Contra Costa and the Tri-Valley is, and as someone who has a lease and is paying rent on Class C space with lovely views and a great location, but a bathroom from 1982. Brian, I'll ask you this. What advice do you have for everybody who's listening to in terms of dealing with your landlord, and how do you start to have these conversations if you are in a building that you think isn't thinking about any of this? Like, what is your best advice about what to do?
So I think one of the things we're advising tenants to do, and so one of our biggest challenges has always been that the beneficiary of the kind of data that this provides is the tenant. Because just like you're paying, think of it, when you pay your utility bill, you don't just blindly pay whatever the landlord says to pay, right? You don't just send it in. But when it comes to your comfort, you're just blindly accepting whatever they say. So one of the questions that came across was, hey, I asked my building manager how much fresh air they're bringing in, and they said we're following Title 24 standards. Okay, so my first answer to that would be that's a cop-out answer, because Title 24 says that you need to have 20 CFM per person minimum outside air intake, unless you have demand control ventilation. Demand control ventilation means I have a CO2 sensor.
Can you translate what's CFM for those?
CFM, cubic feet per minute. So it's the amount of air, actually fresh air being pushed into your space. And so many of you may not realize that it's a requirement in California in a commercial office space to have ventilation going 100% of the time during occupied hours. So one of the ways that, go ahead, Ed, sorry.
No, when you're finished, I want to comment on Title 24 and what happens, how small business owners are tapped on. So finish first.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing that happens is you have standard thermostats, residential class thermostats that are configured to allow the fan to shut off when the zone is satisfied. So when you effectively operate a commercial office environment like a residential environment, and you allow your fan to shut off, you have stopped circulating any kind of air. And you will notice, like in the prior building that we were in, our landlord would say, that's how it's going to run. And if you want fresh air, open your windows. See, that's actually not an effect. It's not a legal response, but it's also not effective. And so many tenants can feel like their hands are tied. So one of the things you can do today is actually start asking them to see the data. So if you're going to tell me that you're bringing in enough air to satisfy Title 24, then actually show me the data so I can see it. Because I need to be able to present to my employees that they're in a safe work environment. Because I can do the social distancing, I can do those things, but I'm not one who actually can tell you how much is being brought in, which is when you can do monitoring technologies, like put your own systems in. You can monitor your space. You can actually have systems like ours and others tell you how much fresh air you're getting, tell you how many air changes you're getting, et cetera, so that you can actually go to your building manager with some data, because a lot of times that's what it will take. I can tell you right now, and Ed has mentioned it, that all of the non-Class A buildings, and there's still a lot of Class A buildings that aren't smart, but all of the ones that aren't smart, that don't have a lot of this technology built in, the owners and property managers are terrified of what's going to happen next. It's not just the fact that their leasable square footage means it's, a one-person office or a 10-person office is now a 3-person office. And I used to be selling it based on people, and now I'm really screwed because I just rented a 10-person office that can seat 3. And does that mean now my tenants all going to come renegotiate, or they're just going to bail on their lease? They don't care. And then the other side of the thing is you're going to start getting much more educated about your air quality, because you're now being forced to be educated about it. You're going to start asking really hard questions, and the answers that say, I follow Title 24. Okay, well, Title 24 is a California standard. ASHRAE at the national level just trumped Title 24 by saying, we recommend that you go 100% outside air in a commercial office building. We recommend that you're adding MERV 13 filters, and we're recommending that you add ultraviolet into your duct to kill pathogens and that sort of thing. None of that is Title 24. That's brand new requirements. So meeting Title 24 does not cover. That's not an effective answer today. Not in this pandemic.
So echoing Brian, let's first of all, what's forever changed? What's forever changed is the tenant and building population is now educated on air quality, internal air quality. So the bigger buildings and the bigger asset managers and developers will take advantage of this to the extent they can and say, my building has a comparative advantage over the other building, because we can, not only do we meet national and local Title 24, we actually can give you sensory data. So then certain companies, and I'll say, unfortunately, Fortune 5,000 companies will then relocate some of their premises. This was the pattern that followed after ADA implementation. So banks, financial institutions, and other big companies had to move or had to get upgraded ADA access and internal access. 80% of the buildings, however, in the greater East Bay are B or C. That's what the economic renaissance that occurred in the 80s and 90s. Unfortunately, I was there or benefited from them, so I'm old. But when most of the suburban buildings were built, they were wood frame, smaller than 50,000 feet, and a lot of them have not been upgraded. Real rents today in Walnut Creek downtown, for instance, are less after inflation adjustment than 1983, believe it or not. So therefore, a lot of buildings have not upgraded. Title 24, and I don't know the answer on national, you implement when you do a building permit upgrade of greater than 10% of your suite. So buildings are gradually over time, because the cost adds almost $2 to $3 a foot to your rent. Now, if you're a landlord, mom and pop, that's 80% of the East Bay, you're first of all been giving rent deferment to your tenants. The banks might not have been as nice, and if they do defer or forgive, they're tacking it on to the back end. So now you have tenants that might just leave. So how do you then spend more money and get less rent? So as Brian said, a lot of the small owners are scared to death. If you're a small business owner who owns your building, How do you upgrade your restaurant building when you can barely stay alive, or your retail building? So all these things will have to be factored in as to the survival. I think over 5 and 10 years, if you're not in a smart building, that will be rare. But I think it's going to take 5 to 10 years for the B buildings and the C buildings to adjust, and how they get through this crisis will be interesting. Therefore, there's going to be what I call a lowering of values during the next 6 months for the suburban office buildings specifically, because the ones that are not upgraded for AI smart systems, the ones that are not upgraded for equivalent Title 24 will be that. The hospitals, and I'll close with this, the hospitals, as they've been taken over by the national hospitals, have been mandating the doctors to move into modern MOB buildings, which do have the proper building systems in them for just basic health reasons.
Okay. So we're definitely have way more questions than we can get to. So I'm going to do kind of a lightning round. So to Brian, got a question about, I'm going to combine 2 questions. So, you know, we've seen some protective shields go up temporarily to protect restaurant workers, grocery workers. So quick answer, do you see that becoming, what are the changes we expect in the long term? And then about cubicles. I was reading this morning that there's actually a complete backlog, 3-month backlog to order plexiglass and cubicles, some of these different things. What can we, what do you say about cubicle safety and long-term physical changes you expect to see in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think the protections are there at the grocery stores because you're not 6 feet away. So
Yeah.
I think if you're going to try to keep people in their cubes and under 6 feet from each other, I think you're going to have plastic or plexi or cubicle windows that are 6 feet tall, so that when they're sitting, their spray or whatever is contained. However, if you've got low cubicles, then you can just separate them by 6 feet and still meet the intent of the guidelines. So I think there's solutions there.
So I have some of my employees on this call, so I'm going to be heavily influenced by what Brian is saying. So we have a typical cube farm exterior offices. So we may have to work in shifts. So I'm going to tell some of my employees, get to work at 6, go home at 2, and then the second shift comes in at 3 and works later, because we were built for 4 per 1,000, and 4 per 1,000 doesn't work in a 6 feet of separation. So there will be that. So this is all brave new world. So how do we adjust? How do we work? We'll still have remote working, therefore, for as late as another 9 months, I think, in some cases, in order to accommodate our workflows. Next question.
I think we may have lost our fearless moderator here. I think that the one other question that come up was about whether we should expect to see a lot of barriers in public spaces, or if that'll continue to be something that you guys anticipate, and if so, if there's enough of that material. I know one thing we've heard is that it can be hard to get your hands on that.
Yeah, I think the innovative, as Ed said, the innovative property owners with money and already some expenses for intelligent buildings, they're going to be very smart about this. They're going to be posting signs that will actually say, with 50 people in the lobby, right? And we currently have 44, right? So they're gonna start doing things to give everyone visibility quickly. The other thing, from a restaurant perspective, I'm working with another colleague who actually makes tablets, and so the kiosks and the touch things and all of the restaurants, those are going to be a thing of the past, right? Nobody's going to have those anymore. The amount of infection that would be transmitted is just too great. So now you're going to be moving to more apps. So your own devices accessing. Well, if the restaurants are also able to then feed other data, like, hey, you're on my app, our temperature is this, our humidity is this, our VOCs are this, our CO2 level is this, our amount of fresh air is this, then you're going to start finding that you're going to have more tenants, more customers going to your restaurant when you're able to give them more information about the space they're in. And so I think you'll see more of that versus trying to set up physical barriers everywhere. I mean, if you're going to go to a restaurant, I guess we could all end up in our own private plexiglass bubble. But I think that is less likely than actually putting sensors in, and just more information to the public, the better. That's what's going to make us all comfortable, is actually understanding and knowing what the environmental characteristics of the space we're in.
I'm agreeing with Brian. I think that's going to rule a lot of new arrangements. So think about, you have this image of tech working at long tables with 20 people next to each other. How is that going to be changed? Think of manufacturing processes where you have people 2 feet apart working on an auto or some other product. So therefore, automation will be coming in certain cases to distance that. That's going to be interesting how that develops and what's the impact on real estate and our economy. So it'll be just interesting to watch all that. By the way, the other thing that's new about this recession recovery versus any other is the internet and Nextdoor. So I don't have my password to Nextdoor, but I just read the headlines, and it's almost like a mob rule. Did you know this supermarket doesn't do this, doesn't do this? So you're going to see people reacting to who doesn't do it, who doesn't have proper procedures in place. So I think there's going to be some self-regulating just because of that.
So we are at 11 o'clock. I disappeared for a minute because my computer died, but I'm glad that we continued. Thank you, Brian and Ed, for handling that. We had a lot of great questions. In particular, Cindy Darling highlighted, what can we do to help cities deal with closing department stores? That's something that we can definitely lean in on and work with. And, we've got the mayor of Walnut Creek here, and, we definitely want to work with our city partners to deal with this. This has both been incredibly enlightening, somewhat depressing, because there's a lot of, I did like how one of the things that Brian said to me really struck. This is going to be really hard, and there is a lot of work to do. And so I'm really, really just so proud to be a part of an organization that's working on these solutions. Really look forward to continuing to work together. Brian shared his information. A lot of you know how to get a hold of Ed. We're happy to share his contact information too. And I just think there's never been a more important time for us to continue to work together and stay together. So we'll follow up on some of those questions. Please reach out if we can be helpful. Want to thank Lindy and Brian and Ed again, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Thank you, Amalia and Elaine, for your leadership, and have a great day. Good luck.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.